I'd like to do history on this program, given it's the 250th anniversary of this nation's founding. Really the 251st before the Declaration of Independence, but who's counting? So let's play along, the 250th. And why is that important today of all days? Iran. Well, what does Iran have to do with this, Mark? Everything. Everything. You know, I hear these people, isolationists and others, talking about we don't want to get involved in foreign wars. Well, we don't want to get involved in stupid wars. That's the point, isn't it? And so that requires a word called prudence. And nobody's more prudential about these things than the President of the United States, Donald Trump. Peace through strength. But he only uses it when it's in America's best interest. But there are other times when we have used our military, when horrendous genocides have taken place, and just humanity has to stand up to defend humanity. That's what we Americans do. That's what you do when it comes to your neighbors. That's when you do when it comes to your family. But I want to talk about our history. Do you know, but for France and to some extent Spain, we wouldn't be celebrating the 250th anniversary of America? Do you know there would not be a United States of America? Do you know that we would have lost the Revolutionary War without the help of allies? We rose up. We, the people of America, disparate colonies, came together, really for the first time. We wanted to be free. We didn't want the long arm of the monarchy in Britain, which was vicious and brutal to our colonists, as you're about to find out, to rule. We wanted our freedom. The Declaration of Independence. All human beings, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, unalienable rights, not just given to we Americans, given to all people. Now, you're right if you're saying, but we can't possibly be the policemen of the world. That's true. We can't possibly get involved in every instance. That's true. That's where prudence comes in. Peace through strength comes in. But there are occasions when we do, and we must, just like the French did in the Revolutionary War, just like the Spanish did, to a lesser extent, in the Revolutionary War. And if it wasn't for the French in particular, we would not be Americans. God knows what we would be. I want to give you a little bit of perspective. This is the Saturday Evening Post. Remember the Saturday Evening Post? Well, some of you do, some of you don't. Now, we have a reputation, mostly among ourselves, that we can go it alone. And we're hearing this more and more from the isolationist wing, which is really a suicidal wing. We can't go it alone. We didn't go it alone in World War I and World War II. We didn't even go it alone completely in the Civil War, and we certainly didn't go it alone during the Revolutionary War. Let me give you an example. France provided money, materials, experienced officers, crucial naval support during the American Revolution. In 1778, France formally recognized the United States by signing the Treaty of Alliance. The French engaged the British fleet, considered the most powerful on the face of the earth, for 2 years before landing thousands of their troops in Newport, Rhode Island in 1780. The French defeated the British on the sea at the Battle of Chesapeake, and then the combined ground troops of the Americans and the French eventually engaged the British at Yorktown, the main, not final, but really considered the final battle of the Revolutionary War. The British surrender at Yorktown led to the end of the war, an outcome that would have been impossible without the alliance with France. Spain in the American Revolution, even though French assistance was the crucial factor, the aid of Spain during the Revolutionary War cannot be overestimated. The country came to America's aid through their previous alliances with France. Spain in particular was interested in delivering some payback to England over losses suffered years previously in the 7 Years' War. France had granted Spain control of the Mississippi Valley since 1763, and it was from that region that Spain helped the colonists on land. From Louisiana to St. Louis, Spain also provided monetary support and participated in the siege of Yorktown. Now, how many of you knew that? But I want to dig more into the French and their Navy and how crucial this was. And when it was all over, the Battle of Yorktown and the Revolutionary War, the French government went bankrupt for helping us. Now, that's not our plan anywhere in the world, but I just want you to know the extent to which we had the assistance of other countries, particularly France. I want you to listen about the Battle of the Capes. How many of you know about the Battle of the Capes? The Battle of the Capes. You mean you weren't taught that? On September 5, 1781, off the coast of Virginia, near the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, one of the most critical naval battles in American history took place. The Battle of the Capes lasted only 2.5 hours and did not involve any Americans, but it was a decisive factor that assured the United States would win independence from Great Britain. It didn't even involve us. The British Navy versus the French Navy. Now, my French isn't very good. In fact, it's non-existent, so I'll do my best. French Admiral Francois-Joseph Paul, Marquis de Gracieux-Tilly, arrived in the West Indies with a French fleet in April 1781. He sent word to French General Comte de Rochambeau in Newport, Rhode Island, that he was under orders to sail his fleet north to assist the French and American armies. General George Washington hoped to use the de Grasse fleet and the Rochambeau army to assist the American army in an attack on the British at New York City. Rochambeau on Washington sent word to de Grasse that his fleet was desperately needed and that any troops and money that de Grasse could bring would be of great help. They suggested that de Grasse come to either New York City, which Washington favored, or the Chesapeake Bay to assist General Lafayette's American army opposing British General Cornwallis. Lafayette, an officer in the French military, volunteered to be in the Revolutionary War and was an aide-de-camp, if you will, to George Washington. So there they were, getting ready for the biggest battle of the war. They hoped the final battle, one side or the other, was going to win. De Grasse decided to bring his fleet to the Chesapeake Bay because of the shorter sailing distance and the more navigable waters compared to New York Harbor. In Santo Domingo, on the island of Hispaniola, present-day Dominican Republic, de Grasse loaded 3,000 French troops' infantry regiments aboard his ships. He also raised 1.2 million liras, worth approximately $6 million today, in Havana, Cuba, from the local government banks and citizens to assist the American and French armies. The point is, look how integral the French Navy and the French Army was in our Revolutionary War. On August 5, de Grasse set sail with his fleet of 37 ships, including 28 ships off the line, that's large battleships, 7 frigates, 2 cutters, heading to the Chesapeake Bay. De Grasse took a dangerous route through the Straits of the Bahamas to avoid the British fleets of Admiral George Rodney and Admiral Samuel Hood, who were protecting British interests and commerce in the West Indies. When General Washington received news on August 14 that de Grasse was sailing to the Chesapeake Bay instead of New York, he quickly changed his plans. 4 days later, he began moving the American and French armies to Yorktown, Virginia, to surround Cornwallis's army, which had just 2 weeks earlier begun setting up a British naval base there. Now, the success of Washington's daring plan depended on de Grasse fleet controlling the Chesapeake Bay. Once British Admiral Rodney learned the French fleet was sailing north, he sent Admiral Hood with a fleet of 14 ships to intercept it. Though Admiral Hood left the West Indies several days after the French fleet, he took a direct route to the Chesapeake Bay and literally passed the French fleet without spotting them. Hood arrived at the bay on August 25. Not seeing any French ships, he raced his fleet to New York City. 4 days later, the French fleet arrived at the bay, anchored, and began offloading French troops, this is in the Chesapeake, near Jamestown to join the army of General Lafayette at Williamsburg, 12 miles from Yorktown. I don't expect you to follow all the details here, just the extent of the involvement in the French. And this is just one battle in our Revolutionary War, without whose help we would not be who we are today. Admiral Hood arrived at New York City on August 28, informed British Admiral Thomas Graves, Commander-in-Chief of the North American Fleet, that de Grasse fleet was in American waters. Admiral Graves also learned that another French fleet of 8 ships under the command of Admiral Louis-Jacques Comte de Barra had left Newport, Rhode Island, sailing south. With 2 French fleets on the move, the 2 British admirals combined their fleets and with Graves in command left New York on August 31 with 19 ships. The point is, 4 massive fleets, the biggest the British had and the French had, confronting one another. The French got there first. They got there with a bigger fleet and bigger ships. They fought the battle. They basically defeated the British. The rest of the British fleets didn't come down. They dared not come down. They didn't want to get caught. Then they turned their guns on Cornwallis, his troops at Yorktown. And the American and the French troops moved on the British troops. They were pulled back. They basically had their backs against the wall, so to speak, and they surrendered. We won the Battle of Yorktown, effectively won the Revolutionary War, 7-year war, a forever war. The neocons and the warmongers. The Americans took on the most powerful military on the face of the earth, and with the help of the French, to some extent, the Spanish, defeated them. And so you got America, and then after the Constitution, the United States of America. Why is that important? The people in Iran want their freedom. They can't do it by themselves. Iran is actually a very young nation. These are young people the age of some of your children and grandchildren. 15, 18, 20, 25, 30. In the streets in massive numbers. What do they want? The same thing we wanted, as described in the Declaration of Independence. They want to pursue their lives, their liberty, and happiness. There are eternal truths. Eternal truths are that every human being is a child of God. What else? The Enlightenment. They want a government that represents them, not one that represses them, threatens them, tortures them, rapes them, kills them, demands that they wear headscarves, demands that they do all kinds of things. An unelected government, a minority of the population, a police state. Now, most of us wouldn't care, except for the fact that these young people are being slaughtered, butchered, in the most horrific ways, shot in the back, shot in hospitals, tortured, raped. They're bringing in militia from Iraq. They're bringing in Hezbollah from Lebanon to slaughter them, to track them down. And what else is going to happen? And if we don't intervene in some way, this will go on for years as they track people down, hunt them down like wild animals. Like wild animals. You've seen the videos. You've seen the pictures. You've seen young people on their backs with their eyes wide open, dead, shot in the chest. Hospitals are talking about people shot in the back of the head, shot in the backs. And when these stormtroopers, this SS, comes upon the population that are protesting as they're running away, they're machine gunning them in the backs. And now they have their military involved, the tanks, AK-47s. This is a regime that says that you can bomb our nuclear weapons, President Trump, but what you can't bomb is our knowledge about nuclear weapons, and we're never going to stop. This is a 7th century, barbaric, primitive, really vile regime. And on top of this fundamentalism, they're crooks, they're mobsters. They're all wealthy at the top, worth billions. They steal the money from the people. We see this also, by the way, with the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. And here you have Muslims slaughtering Muslims. Not that all the Persian people are Muslims, but a whole lot are, if not a majority. And what do you see in our country? Nothing. Where's the river to the sea crowd? Where's CARE? Where are the Muslim representatives in Congress? Where are the imams? You don't see riots in Dearborn, Michigan? Other parts of the country, Paterson, New Jersey, nothing. Instead, at the same time, you see people protesting for Hamas in front of synagogues in New York. You see a synagogue burned down in Jackson, Mississippi, as this ideology and this terrorism spreads from one country to the next. And Iran is the hub, Iran and Qatar, which is why Qatar reportedly says you can't use our base to deal with Iran. Our base? I thought it was America's base. And you know what? If a country of 300,000 people is telling us what we can and cannot do with our base, then we should get out of there and be done with it. And they can take all their money and stick it. You know, when we think of the British, we think of refinement, right? We think of BBC TV, baking shows, beautiful accents, and that's all true. But it wasn't true during the Revolution. They had the prison boats, the HHS Jersey, among others. And they treated the colonists who they captured pretty much like the people are being treated in Iran. The estimate is about 20 to 22,000 Americans died during the Revolutionary War, and that half of them died on the prison ships. They were either killed or tortured, but there were diseases that were rampant because they defecated where they ate. There were hundreds packed into these ships. The most notorious was this one called the Jersey. The beef that they fed, to the extent they were fed at all, most of them starved to death, was rancid. And the people who were there knew they had three choices. Either they would become traitors and fight for the British, they would find a way to escape if they could, and some did, but not many, or they would die a horrible death. And half of those involved in the Revolutionary War died on those ships. Just like these people who are fighting for their freedom in Iran, they're dying in prisons, although they may not be hanging them publicly, but they're executing them behind the scenes. Everybody knows this to be true, the slaughter that's taking place. And I'm telling you all this, America, but because revolutions need outside help. That's just the truth. Doesn't mean we should be involved in all of them. But the Persian people are mostly a Western people. They want their freedom. And the regime that they are trying to change is the regime that will continue to threaten you and me with nuclear weapons. Oh, and by the way, last week, the regime put out a not-so-funny graphic of our president in Butler, Pennsylvania, talking about assassinating our president, and that this time the bullet won't miss. How much longer are we going to put up with this? How much longer is the world going to put up with this? The fact is the regime is weak. It's only strong in slaughtering innocent girls, innocent women, people who are old. And it can barely do that without outside help. What's going on in Iran is one of the most horrific genocides we've seen. That's the truth. We needed help, and we got a lot of help to win our revolution. And they need our help too. I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.